Manoli, I'm sorry.
What, you were expecting Manoli at this interview?
No, I'm just saying it feels really strange.
He's expected to still continue to attend.
I know, he said he was gonna. Well, heck, I was gonna call him in. We're gonna be all spread out. Andrew, let's move over and keep on coming.
Yeah.
Move over this way. And then, I don't know. She usually sits here, but she usually sits where? There.
I'm not taking her seat.
You're not taking her seat?
Yeah.
So what do we want to do?
Hey, David.
Thank you. We're waiting for Karen and I don't know.
Pat forget?
She's proposed.
Have you met Andrea yet?
We're going to start actually. The walk commission.
David.
Walk everybody.
The famous David Bardine.
Hey, David.
My commissioner.
That's right.
Used to be my commissioner before, then she left.
And then he came and
then I left for 15 minutes, and now she's back again, and we were flopping.
we're flip-flopping.
Good job. I just, are you totally?
No. Well, we got to fill out forms.
Wait a minute, who's there? Wait a minute. Are you serious?
Karen.
Oh, it's Karen. You had Karen?
Good evening. Welcome to the January 20th, 2015 meeting of ANC 3F. I'm Adam Toth, Commissioner of 3F01. We have a quorum of 5 out of 7, so we can begin. Let's quickly just introduce ourselves. Who's here? If you want to start, Malachi.
I'm Malachi Nugent, Commissioner for 3F06.
Mary Beth Ray, 3F3.
Sally Gresham, ANC 3F04.
Andrea Molod, 3F05.
And it looks like Karen from 3F02, Karen Perry, is not here, and Pat Jakopchek from 3F07 is not here as well. So we have a quorum. So here's the agenda that I circulated. Does anyone have additions or deletions?
Oh, wait.
Okay, so we'll add a vote on Van Ness Vision Committee.
At the bottom?
And
Just to
the
re-up.
bottom.
To re-up, yeah. And then the Johnson's explanation of their.
Okay. And then we have the owners of 3318 Fessenden want to present a filing that's before the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And then we'll vote on that next month. But since they're here, I figured since we have a pretty short meeting, they may as well explain it to the public, and then we can ponder it
And
for a
I
month.
want to make a motion to create the committee, the technology committee.
All right.
What was that, a motion for what?
To create the technology committee.
Okay.
Okay, so we meant Van Ness Vision.
Okay, so with that, I'll make a motion to approve the revised agenda. Is there a second? All right, second by Mary Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye. You guys vote? Agenda, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the agenda passes 5-0, and Commissioner Pat is now here. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, I'm Pat Jakopchek. I'm representing 3F07, and happy to be working for you guys.
Great. So first thing, we just have some administrative things, and then we'll turn to the police report. So we need to elect our officers, since none of us are officers at the moment. We're required to elect chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. So I'll just open the floor to anyone that wishes to make a motion for any of these positions.
I'd like to make a motion.
Sure.
I'd like to nominate Adam Toth as chairman of the commission. He's done a great job for 2 years, and I think we'd all be proud to have him continue in that position. I'd like to nominate Karen Perry as vice chairman of the commission. I've tried to reach her and was not able to reach her, so if she's elected without her knowledge, That's not ideal, but I suppose she could turn it down. And I'd like to nominate Malachi Nugent as treasurer. Malachi works for the Department of Treasury, so he has it in his DNA. And Andrea Malad, I would like to nominate as secretary. There's just nothing like initiation by fire. So Andrea is, she's got the fingers going on the laptop, so that's a good sign.
Second.
Great. Yeah, so I mean, I guess technically, does anyone who's been nominated not wish to serve? You good?
Yep.
Okay, so I think we can make Karen vice chair, and if she declines, we'll redo it next month. But given that, let's vote on these officers. If you're in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All right, passes 6-0-0. So there's our officers. We approved the meeting schedule at a prior meeting. Basically, we meet the third Tuesday of every month. Possibly not in August, possibly not in December. Depends if we have something. We don't need to make a motion particularly. I'm just noting if anyone has issues with that, who's a commissioner, just let us know so we can figure it out, a new date if needed. So next up, we have to make a motion to participate in the security fund. Basically, if one of us steals money, the DC government pays us back if we join this fund. Otherwise, we're on the hook. So it's $25. So I'll make a motion to join the ANC security fund for $25 for 2015. I think that's all it has to be, right? Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so that passes 6-0-0. So I think that is all administrative matters. So I will turn it over. So we'll go to the police report real quick, since I think an officer. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Captain Gresham from the 2nd Police District, and I'm here to give you information on the police report, the crime report. This report is actually based on a 30-day period from December 21st, 2014 through today's date. And what we did, we compared it to that same time period last year. And I'm happy to report that violent crime is down by 100%.
Wow.
Which is very good. Excellent news to start the new year off with. Property crime is also down. That's down by 17%. And total, I'm sorry, that's down by 13%. And total crime is down by 17%. We did have a robbery that occurred last week. It occurred in the 3800 block of Chesapeake Street, Northwest. But that case is closed with one arrest. It was a case that involved a number of juveniles from Wilson High School and one of the neighboring schools here in the District of Columbia. And again, that case was closed with 2 arrests. What we are starting to see is an increase in thefts. That is actually up, that classification, theft is up by 17%. So, I'm sorry, 100%. There were an additional number of crimes reported involving thefts and also theft from autos. But theft from autos are down. They're down by 17%. So it seems like the increases are basically in thefts. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may want to ask.
Where
Yes,
are the
ma'am.
thefts, like theft, when you say theft?
Thefts,
what do you mean? Is that burglary or robbery?
No,
or?
they're actually totally two distinct separations. Thefts are, for example, you may have a contractor coming to your home and the person may steal your cell phone. That's a theft. Or someone may venture onto your property and steal one of your, say for example, packages or something like that. That's a theft. A burglary is a totally separate category.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there were no burglaries within the last 30 days.
Does anyone have questions at all?
I have a question separate from this report, if we're ready to move
Yeah.
to something else. Lieutenant Craig, had spoken with me about putting some cruisers in an alley, the alley at the 3600 block between Ellicott and Fessenden. During rush hour, a lot of people cut through there to get around traffic on Nebraska, and that's right by Murch Elementary, so there are a lot of kids who are walking there. So he had said he was going to ask some cruisers to just sit there and slow traffic down a little bit, and I'm wondering if you're aware of that and if those cruisers have been dispatched.
I will speak with him on that and follow up. He is working tonight, and I'll make sure that it is addressed.
Great, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh. Who is our contact if if one of the ANC commissioners needs to reach the police department?
It would be your actual PSA lieutenant.
Okay, so that would be,
Right now it's Lieutenant Craig, but there may be a transition to another lieutenant.
okay, and when will we find out?
We should know probably before the end of the month.
Okay. Thank you.
Is our contact still for traffic officer Frank Check?
It is, yes ma'am.
Okay. He does a great job. I would like to know if he is still kind of patrolling the Brandywine, Broad Branch, Davenport area.
Yes, he is. That's actually part of his daily patrol routine. He is.
The other place is Wyndham right off Connecticut, where Calvert Woodley and Giant. A lot of people park at that mini park illegally, and I'm hoping that he is giving out tickets still there. It's a very congested area.
Okay.
Could you ask him to
Sure.
maybe communicate with me on that?
Sure, I will.
Okay, thank you.
I will.
Does anyone in the audience have questions at all? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Next up, commissioner announcements. We'll start with Malachi, work our way to the
Okay,
end.
I just have two. Jeannie Niles, who's the new deputy mayor for education, has agreed to attend the next HSA meeting at Murch Elementary to discuss the Murch modernization program going forward. So that will be on Tuesday, February 10th at 7 p.m. at Murch. And the other announcement is we were successful in getting some potholes filled in an alley, more alley work, an alley between Appleton and Brandywine at the 3600 block. So now we're waiting for some resurfacing work to be done there.
You and
I have 4 short announcements. First of all, I'd like to thank St. John's College High School and the University of Maryland singers for making our caroling on Connecticut Avenue a success. It was really cold, but Giant let them come inside to sing and warm up, which was nice. We seemed to get the biggest crowd on the east side of the metro, and it was worth it to brave the cold just to see the faces of the commuters coming out of the metro and hearing the caroling. So special thanks also to Marjorie Scher, Deepa Mehta, and Judy Sullivan for their help. The second announcement is that the Forest Hills Citizens Association meets this Thursday at 7 o'clock here at Forest Hills of DC. And the suggested annual dues are $25 per family. The third announcement is that the Van Ness Vision Committee will begin hosting meetings at WAMU thanks to Sally Gresham's persistence. They have a beautiful conference room right on Connecticut Avenue. And so our next meeting will be on Friday, February 13th. And we're hoping to have Christina Amoruso from the DC Department of Small and Local Business Development speak about Main Streets and how that program will work in Van Ness. And the fourth and final announcement is that Ryan Hand, our Ward 3 planner, is continuing with the work of the Van Ness Framework listening sessions. He's surveying the community about what retail options we'd like to see at Van Ness. If you have not filled out one of those surveys, see me and I will help you find it online. And on Saturday, January 31st, from 9 to 12, Ryan will host a community-wide workshop at the UDC Law School next to Acacia Bistro. And again, it's basically it's kind of the city's effort to invest in some of the recommendations of the Van Ness Vision Committee. That's all.
I have none. Do you have any?
I have three. The first is Park Van Ness. As you all know, that's moving along. They're still doing concrete work. The current traffic control plan, which was presented last May 29th, is still in existence. They have, Saul and Clark have filed for a new traffic control plan from roughly January to June. It is the same plan with some sign changes. So therefore, much to everybody's chagrin, the sidewalk will still be closed until probably June. You will notice there still is a hole adjacent to the sidewalk. There will continue to be a 40-foot hole because that's where they have the parking vaults being put in at this time, and then they will be doing the public space site work. And that will run roughly June to November. So just so you all know, we will probably still have a closed sidewalk for quite a while. That's the big news. The second thing is on 32nd Street, the 4800 block between Davenport and Ellicott, we have new curbs and gutters and a sidewalk. Yay to DDOT for finally getting that in. And the third announcement is in the back of the room, there is a new TV that the ANC hopefully will send a check to the new treasurer to Forest Hills of DC. We'll be able to do PowerPoint presentations, etc.
Cool. Andrew, do you have any
I have
announcements?
nothing.
All right. Next up is our open forum. If you're in the audience and wish to raise an issue about something in our ANC that's not on the agenda, you can come up to our microphone. Feel free to come up if you have any time. Okay. Next up, let's just quickly do this Board of Zoning Adjustment filing for a proposed second-story side addition to an existing single-family dwelling located at 3318 Fessenden Street.
I'd like to thank the Johnsons for being here, and I have not had a chance to read through all these documents. I understand that, in short, your neighbors have agreed to the addition, and your footprint remains the same, and you're not taking out any trees. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Would you like to give us an overview of the project? And commissioners, each of you has a set of documents.
Thank you. I'm Tom Johnson. We are residents at 3318 Fessenden, where we've been since 1976. And that is, I believe, kind of right out this window, if I've got my orientation right. We're the house right next door to the parking lot here at Forest Hills of DC, just to the east on Fessenden. We plan to essentially raise the roof on the side of our house above an existing one-story, what we call the library, so that it enables us to put a dressing area and a small office above that room. Of the pictures that you have in the packet there, the first one that's an actual photo will show you the comparison of our home as it currently is with our neighbors who already did a similar project 15 years ago. And I didn't show a picture, but the people one house beyond that also did a similar project a long time ago. I think it was even done when we moved in. So we're not changing the footprint at all. We have gone around to all of our neighbors. Those right next door to us have all provided individual letters, And then we've also attached a list of signatures for all of the other people within 200 feet in any direction from our location. The Brandeis Court Citizens Association has given us an email en blanc in terms of all of their people have seen the plan and are okay with it, as has Sandy here on behalf of Forest Hills of DC. So there's really no opposition that we're aware of, and we're not really doing anything that's outside the footprint or the bounds of our existing building. But because of the Forest Hills tree slope overlay, there is a requirement for an increased side yard, and that's what we've asked for a special variant or special exception for, and that's scheduled for a hearing on February 24th. And so ANC will be asked to provide their input to that hearing. Can I answer any questions?
Can you tell me what the side yard minimum is?
8 feet
8 feet.
under the new plan. When the house was built, it was 6. And
Okay.
so our house is 6 feet from the side yard.
Okay.
So if you can imagine
Right. So
coming
you're 2
in on
feet
the second
into
floor
the-
just to manage the 8-foot setback was what we're applying for a variance.
Even though the bottom footprint is in the
You got
6
it.
foot,
You got it.
and you're taking no trees down,
That's right.
correct?
That's right. And we've gone down, the architect and I went down and met with Matt LeGrant a week and a half ago. So actually, as he heard, exactly what it was we were going to do, he revised the earlier letter that they had provided, so that what you're seeing there is a revised request for an exception, which enables us to go for expedited hearing at BZA. And he's raised no other questions about what.
Have they had, do you know if they've had this problem with other?
I don't know. The
That's
tree
an
slope,
interesting,
the tree slope overlays, starts at Pheasant and goes
Right.
south.
yes.
And our block tends to have houses with a smaller lot size,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way they were built, whereas the rest of the Forest Hills area tends to have wide and wider side yards. So it's kind of unusual and unique to our specific section there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you for any support you'll provide, and you'll bring it up for a vote next meeting, is that correct?
We will.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next up is discussion of Pepco Exelon merger, so I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Yeah, so there's been a proposal that has actually been accepted by the Pepco Holdings Incorporated shareholders, that there be a merger between Exelon and Pepco Holdings. There's been quite a bit of community opposition to this. It's, the Public Services Commission needs to vote on this, and they're gonna vote sometime in the spring. And they need to vote on things that are in the public interest. And our contention is that this is not in the public interest. We have with us this evening Rob Robinson from Grid 2.0, who can come and address some of the issues that are behind the objection to the merger. At next month's meeting, we're going to vote on a resolution to ask the Public Services Commission to reject the merger.
Thank you, Andrea and members of ANC 3F. My name is Robinson. I'm an intervener in the Public Service Commission proceeding in regard to this proposed merger. And this is the second time our group has done it. We intervened in the last distribution rate case, which was the fourth consecutive distribution rate increase case since 2009. But however, our reason for intervening at the time was because we keep paying more and more money for a distribution system. It's the electric grid. It's basically the wires and the feeder circuits and the voltage stations that step the power down from transmission that serves the Washington, D.C. area, which also includes Maryland and Prince George's County. The reason we don't support this is because, quite frankly, I come from the renewable energy community. And since 2006 now, beginning with something called the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op, we're residents of Ward 1, just across the park. We've been working to make open solar renewable energy accessible to people here in DC. We got involved in inserting solar renewable energy credit financing in the 2008 Clear Affordable Energy Act, which basically created a platform for solar to take place in DC. And that included also interconnection and net metering, so that it would be legal and required for the power company, PEPCO, to enable people to put net metering on their facilities, so that when they produced solar electric on the roof, the meter would actually turn backwards, so they could be credited for the energy that they produced and used on a monthly basis. The reason why that's very, very important is because if you don't get credit for producing it, it just goes back to the grid. Now, it's good to have new electricity going back to the grid, but there are a lot of engineering issues there and crediting issues. So we've been working, the solar co-op movement now includes 12 or 13 co-ops in all 8 wards of Washington, D.C., and we've spent more time than anything else doing legislation to basically make sure these things are accessible to everybody and they work. In 2013, we were successful in getting something called the Community Renewable Energy Act of 2013 approved. What that means is that even if you're a renter, or if you're a small business owner, or if you're a church, and your roof is obstructed with trees, or if your roof is shaky, or if it's got barrel tiles and you can't support it, you can invest in a solar array someplace. It could be on a warehouse, on a school building or a public building, a commercial place like DC USA at 14th and Park Road that's got lots of roof space. And on your monthly electric bill, you will receive credit for the amount of electricity produced by that particular portion of the array. And it's basically just an algorithm that determines, based on what size you subscribe to, you get credit for the amount of electricity that's produced according to figures that have been established in the world for many years now. The reason that we intervened before and the reason that we don't like what's going on now is that we have a grid which is really at the end of its life cycle, and the system by which we operate utilities is called a cost recovery system. What that means is that the utility is able to make more profit and is able to charge more, which we, of course, as ratepayers have to pay, if they can prove that they spent more money on the distribution system that they have. Now, in D.C., in 1999, PEPCO and the Public Service Commission agreed to this, allowed itself to divest its power generation and to restructure itself purely as a distribution company. In other words, they're not making money because they sell you power. So they don't make more profit if you buy more power. And of course, as we all know, with energy efficiency in the United States and many other developed economies, the actual demand for electricity has been going down as energy efficiency and demand management technology increase. But the costs have been going up. So our concern generally is that what consumers in Washington, D.C. and other places should be looking at is not paying more and more on an annual basis because the shareholders of investor-owned utilities need more money or want more money, but we should be looking at systems built around improved 21st century technology, energy efficiency, which we know is keeping demand down and enabling us to manage that demand, and hooking that up with renewable energy, which is free. Does anybody here have a coal mine or an oil well in their backyard? No. But you all get sunshine coming in the windows or the doors at some point. And if it was feasible, you could put up the windmills, the turbine generation, wind generation, but in a city that's not feasible. They're huge, they're 65 feet tall, they make a great deal of noise, and it's not going to happen. But we are blessed in Washington, D.C. with a preponderance of flat roofs. So we know that we can produce between 30 and 50%, although we haven't done this study yet, of the energy that we use, that we consume here in D.C., by producing it on the site where you use it. That's called distributed generation. The problem is that the grid has to be designed to do these things. It has to be a reliable grid. It has to be maintained. And since PEPCO divested and restructured itself and became a holding company and began buying other utilities, the results have not been so good for consumers. For example, between 2001 and 2013, district government ratepayers' electricity bills have increased 61%, compared to 38% increases in the cost of living, as measured by the Department of Labor and other federal agencies. In 2009, we woke up and found a Washington Post article that said that the grid here in Washington, D.C. had fallen to the bottom quartile for reliability when measured against all other U.S. Municipalities. We also know that for low-income families who in 2001 were twice as likely to have their power disconnected because they couldn't pay the bills as is, with these increases that we've been experiencing, they're now 3 times as likely. The other thing is the economic development issue. In 2001, PEPCO had about 2,500 employees throughout the system, which has grown to include Delaware and parts of southern New Jersey as well as Maryland. Today, the total system has 1,400 employees, and there are really only about 103 people in Washington, D.C. that live here and are employed by PEPCO. So this is not a big economic generator. However, creating green energy, energy renewables, energy efficiency is creating jobs. When we put solar on our home in 2009, there were no businesses in D.C. that were located in D.C. that would install solar on your home. Today, there are almost 30, including 3 minority-owned companies. And we know that about 30% of the total cost of an installation goes into government coffers. So the money that they spend on gas, on payroll taxes, on other taxes is supporting the local government and helping bear the cost of those things. We also know that since 2009, when the Clean and Affordable Energy Act, passed by your council member Mary Che, went into effect and we could begin installing solar formally, the cost of a solar installation has gone from about $8 a watt installed down to $3. It's really going below $3. And our organization, DC Sun, is doing what's called bulk purchasing so that groups of homeowners can be collected together. We can bid those jobs out and drive the cost even down lower, which means it's more accessible to people, and it means that creating these community solar facilities that renters and small businesses can subscribe to is going to work. I want to talk about the basic deal so you understand why, from a ratepayer standpoint, we don't think this is a good deal. The reason PEPCO announced in April of last year that they were going to do the deal is because it was going to include a premium payment. The whole deal cost $6.8 billion, but of that $6.8 billion, a premium payment of between $1.2 billion and $2.5, depending on how you measure it, would go to the shareholders and the executives that brought them the deal. It wasn't done because it would produce lower cost. It wasn't done because it would produce better reliability. None of those things were there. The deal was strictly a benefit to the shareholders and the PEPCO executives. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about who gets what. Well, we know that the premium of the 1.2 to 2.5 billion of the total nearly 7 billion cost is going to go to the shareholders and the executives. Here's what Exelon gets for the $6.8 billion. The first thing they get is PEPCO shareholders go away. They get paid and they go away. The second thing, they get all of the assets and all the distribution systems that are owned by PEPCO. The third thing, and this is what's really great for them, is they get a captive, non-competitive revenue base. They get us as ratepayers. And what we get as ratepayers out of the deal is we get a $50 credit and we get sold to Exelon. Now, Exelon is the largest nuclear power generator in the U.S., And if this deal goes through, it's going to become the largest distributor of energy. They own Commonwealth Edison in Chicago, PECO in Philadelphia, BG&E in Baltimore, and if this happens, they'll own the entire Pepco holdings. The other thing that I want to add to this, that the dimension of this, is the fact that what Pepco and Exelon say is good about the deal for us, and why the Public Service Commission should approve it, is because their costs will get lower. Because it's a much larger entity doing business, it'll have 10 million customers, their costs will go down, the economies of scale for procurement and things. And that's true, those costs will go down. What you don't hear from the company is that those cost savings will not be passed back to the ratepayers. They also say that the ratepayers, it's a good deal for the ratepayers because there'll be a rate freeze for 3 years. And indeed, that's what they're proposing. What you don't hear is that or what actually isn't explained to you is if their costs are going down and you're paying the same amount of money to them, they're making more money. They really are. The last thing they say that it's a good deal, the last reason that they say it's a good deal is because they create a community investment fund for DC in a value of $14 million. Well, that fund is going to be used to give everybody a $50 credit, which will be used when they become Exelon customers. We just think that's a pittance. We don't see anything there that's really a long-term benefit or a significant benefit to ratepayers. The other part of the problem, and this is a clash of business models. When Pepco divested itself of its power generation, they told us, and this is in writing, our job is to provide you, our customers, with the cheapest electricity and the most reliable grid that we can. Exelon is a vertically integrated business that, in addition to producing nuclear power, owns transmission and it owns distribution resources. Their interest is in selling their energy, transmitting their energy, and distributing their energy at the highest price possible. Now, there's nothing the matter with that, but that's a direct conflict with what our utility, Pepco, that we've had since 1912, has been doing. So that's a concern, too. Let me back up for a second. Let me be clear again about why we think it's important to oppose this. Exelon will say, well, you know, we're really not against renewable energy. We're the 11th largest wind-owning company in the U.S. And we own solar as well. So we're not against renewables. And that's true. But the question is not, it's really not, ladies and gentlemen, whether or not Exelon can own renewables. The question is whether or not Exelon will go to the mat with communities that have already adopted them and try to roll back the legislation and change the net metering standards, for example, the renewable portfolio standards that enable renewables to be built here in D.C. They fought that in Illinois, they fought it in New York State, in Ohio states, and in Pennsylvania. So we're concerned that the 10-year battle that we've had with our Pepco utility, and in recent years, they have been coming around to renewables. They did support the Community Renewables Energy Act. We worked very hard to make sure that they did, but now they've sold themselves to a company which is really the biggest opponent of this form of electricity in the country. So we really don't see that as a step forward for us. We see it as embroiling us in another protracted battle to change the energy paradigm that we've worked for. I think I've said enough, and I can take questions, but I thank ANC 3F and everyone in the audience for being patient so long.
Do you have questions?
Thank you for taking the time to make this presentation.
I know it's a little dense in some cases.
It is, and I think I have a lot to learn before our next meeting. I had two questions. How would the Exelon, is it a merger or an acquisition?
It's an acquisition.
Okay.
It's a takeover.
How would the acquisition affect the bearing of cables, and how would it impact reliability?
I'm not sure that I can answer how it would affect the bearing of, you mean the undergrounding proposal that's before the city right now? It's really not going to change that. That's been adopted by the legislature. It's going to be, as far as we can see, it's going to be good business for Exelon. They're going to be making money on it the same way that Pepco would. And the other question is the, what was it?
Reliability.
Oh, the reliability. The joint applicants, represented by Pepco, made a statement in their formal testimony to the Public Service Commission, and the witness's name was Alden. And in his testimony, he stated that one of the two measures of reliability, the average duration figure, it's referred to as the SAIDI index, would be 107 minutes. That measure has been set by the Public Service Commission for the period of 2018-2020 to be at 80 minutes, 81 minutes. So they've said that they would miss that target for the duration of interruptions by 30%. So we see that as an admission that they're not going to, their reliability is not going to meet the standards that our Public Service Commission has already set. Now we've heard them say other things at lots of meetings, but the bottom line is that it's testified that it will not meet that standard for DC as set by the PSC.
And had Pepco said that they could meet?
Pepco has also said that they didn't think that they could meet it. Okay. But what they've told us in public meetings is, with Exelon coming in, they'll be able to use their resources to provide better, more budget to us so that we can make it, so that we can improve the reliability faster. But that's not what they testified to, and they didn't change that testimony during the course of the proceedings so far. So they can't change it. That's the bottom line.
I have a question. This information about DC versus BG&E.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it you think our Grid 2.0 working group thinks that we're getting, obviously money-wise, a bum deal from when BG&E got $200 versus they're offering $50?
That's a comparison that was done by a housing provider, a national housing provider. But what it does do is it shows what's being offered, what was offered to Baltimore, right, in contrast to being what's offered here.
Right.
And we think that it shows that this is not really Exelon offering this community the best deal it can possibly come up with. That's not, from my perspective, that's not the worst part of it, but we think that it shows quantifiably that it's definitely not the best deal imaginable.
Right, I mean, they've given them a lot, well, I want to say perks, but higher education, development offshore wind, I mean, nothing for DC. What does the council say about this?
Well, I didn't go in.
New mayor, now that we have a new mayor.
They really haven't spoken about it a great deal. I must be honest with you that the Public Service Commission is an independent agency, and there, strictly speaking, is no formal role for the council or the executive to say to the Public Service Commission, hey, you have to do this. That's up to the Public Service Commission. But there are some issues that are troubling. For example, the Public Service Commission has 6 one-sentence criteria for whether or not any merger deal is going to be in the public interest, whereas many other jurisdictions, Maryland, for example, has a whole law that says these are the performance measures and the criterias that a merger has to meet.
Right, but they're a state, not a...
Of course they're a state. We're the nation's capital.
Here lies the issue.
Well, all I'm saying is that the grid here in the power system that we have in Washington, D.C. Is as critical in a way to our country as the state of Maryland's grids and its utilities are to that particular jurisdiction. And of course, our Pepco covers significant parts of the state of Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey as well. So, yes, sir.
Our critical grid, you mentioned it's near the end of its life cycle already, I believe.
Yeah,
And
most of our grid was installed, in the 30s, 40s, and the 50s with slight upgrades. We've undergrounded more here in DC, for example, than they have in Montgomery County, Maryland. But it's basically a 20th century grid.
Sure. And now it needs to be updated. Those costs will be passed on to the consumers?
As I said, we've had 4 distribution rate increase over $100 million since 2009, basically to patch the existing grid.
So is an overhaul needed, and if so, who do you think could get it done more affordably, Exelon or Pepco?
There's a short and a long answer to that. The short answer is Exelon has announced in terms of its capital projects that it's going to protect the value of its grids. What that means in sort of plain English is we're not planning any major capital upgrades. The reason that they like distribution utilities is because they own all of these nuclear generating plants and reactors. Most of those are over 40 years old, and as they get older, it costs more and more money to maintain them safely. So costs that they would ordinarily have to put into trust funds and this sort of thing are now lessened or potentially lessened by adopting these revenue streams coming in from large utilities, which people can't compete that much to take those customers away from Pepco unless you basically have a referendum and say we don't like Pepco or we don't have Exelon. And for most communities that want to go municipal and create a municipal utility and kick out an investor-owned utility, which is what we have, it takes about 10 years to do that. So we don't see that anything is going to happen immediately, and our fundamental concern is that there are lots of things like self-healing circuitry. Chattanooga, Tennessee has that with a fiber optic system for their grid. When the derecho came through Chattanooga, the longest periods of time it took to restore power were usually 45 minutes. We had a lot of parts of DC that were out for 8 days. We think that microgrids, we think that battery storage. During the derecho, we had a relative in our family living in a long-term care facility. The power went out immediately. It was a facility across the river in Northeast. The backup system broke down in less than 2 days, and the power was out the entire time after that. We went over there on Tuesday before the 4th of July. There were 2 Metro buses jammed in the parking lot entrance to this small long-term care hospital facility, and there were dozens, almost 100 people in wheelchairs waiting to get on a bus to get to cool air. I mean, in the nation's capital, our grid looks astonishingly like Havana,
those are all
Cuba.
very bad things. I'm just curious, are they less likely or more likely under Exelon?
I think that they're less likely under Exelon because Exelon is going to want to keep grids that it has the best chance of selling its transmission and its generation to. Okay. If it owns the distribution system, it wants to bring its generation power and its transmission as close to that as possible. The grid operator, there's a thing called the independent system operators throughout the U.S. that you've heard of that operate regional grids. The regional grid that operates between Illinois and Michigan and here in the eastern seaboard is called the PJM Interconnect. There is something called the independent market monitor that looks at how the markets are working because there's a lot of money that goes into this. And they testify, sent testimony to the Public Service Commission here that said because of the acquisition and because of the consolidation of power represented by both Pepco and Exelon, it was very, very likely that competition for transmission would be reduced and the result would be rising costs. So we don't see Exelon investing in something that's going to provide them with lesser and fewer opportunities to make more money with their vertically integrated transmission and distribution generation.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I get into the weeds on some of these things. Someone else out here had a question. Andrea.
So if the merger doesn't go through, Pepco is left basically as it is now. Does that make them a better partner for some of these, taking the grid into the 21st century?
We think obviously that it does. We think whenever a community is willing to show that not only does it have an affirmative vision for an energy system, but it's willing to back that up and go head to head with the utilities when they're doing things that they think are not in their best interests, that you're going to get a more positive response from the Public Service Commission and from the utilities. And we also think that's a way of educating our elected officials. One of your ANC commissioners, you can see areas where the management of government is breaking down because those problems come to you. You're on the front lines at the grassroots level. And the energy is a big area. Energy is becoming more and more ubiquitous to every aspect of our life. But our systems are getting older, they're getting less reliable, and they're getting more and more expensive.
Will Pepco be able to maintain that, though, if they don't do a merger?
Will they be able to maintain it?
Yes, will they be able to?
They'll have the
march
same
forward?
resources they have now. When we asked Pepco, actually we were at 3B, where the chairman of 3B before the election asked Pepco directly, they said, what is the benefit? Why did you decide to do this? What is it?
Right.
What's it going to do that's better for Pepco? And they say it'll make us stronger. And then they say, and you say, what does that mean? And they say, well, the president of Pepco will still be the president of Pepco, and the chief executive officer will be David Velasquez. And you say, well, okay, the chief executive officer of PHI Holdings will still be the executive officer of PHI Holdings, but you won't have any shareholders, and Exelon will own all your assets. So how does that make you better, that you've given away your assets? We don't see it as being something that's going to make us better. We see it as something that's going to remove us from the organization that makes the day-to-day decisions. And let's face it, the budget for Pepco, the who's hired and who's fired, and what policies Exelon follows through Pepco are not going to be set by local executives. They're going to be set by Exelon. That's what happens now. And we've been involved in meetings with them throughout this process, so we're listening to this. And the notion that Pepco is going to be calling all the shots the way it does now is not there. It's not going to happen. I thank you for putting up with this. Yes, ma'am.
Are you opposed to the acquisition outright, or are there changes that could be made in the structure or whatever that would be acceptable?
You're saying, are there ways that this could be made to work? Yes, there are ways that it could be made to work. Is Exelon going to be inclined to do that? It doesn't look like it, because it's not in their financial best interest. They've got this huge nuclear fleet that's aging and getting more expensive, and they're doing things like branching out and buying distribution because it improves their revenue stream. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
I mean, if there were like 3 fixes to the deal, just
What are the 3 fixes?
Yeah.
You'd have to.
Picking a random number and just like keep it at a really high level, please.
I think that they would have to support orders from the Public Service Commission that would remove ratepayers from bearing any of the business burdens of Exelon that we don't have to bear now. That would be one thing. Perhaps more importantly to us, we would want agreement on renewable portfolio standards so that we can create, we still have the possibility of creating more access to more renewables, and we would want them to agree to support all the interconnection and net metering that we have right now. We would not want to be fighting forever about the same victories that it's taken us almost 10 years to achieve. But there are probably a lot of other better, our expert witnesses would have other things to say about ring fencing and things like that. Again, thank you for your patience. Oh, and we hope that you'll consider a resolution after you've thought about this and read some of the documents.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Be careful, be careful.
Trailing glory.
I have nothing. I'd like to see this on the agenda for a vote on a resolution at next month's meeting.
Okay.
Are you proposing the same resolution U
Yes.
that has been done by the other ANCs?
Yes, very similar language to the resolution that's been passed by 13 other ANCs now, I think.
Right, we have a resolution that's been passed by 13 ANCs and about 5 civic citizens and other neighborhood organizations.
Okay, and we can circulate that to our listserv, I guess, so everyone can read it. Okay.
I s-
Yeah, she sent it to all of us.
To our Yahoo group?
No, just to us.
Well, that's,
You stuck that
needs to be
listserv.
circulated
He's
to
done
everyone.
the listserv, the
It
Yahoo.
Okay,
exists.
good.
Okay. Does, I guess, anyone in the audience else have comments on PEPCO or anything? David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm David Bardeen, and unlike Mr. Robinson, I am not an intervener in the merger case, and I don't have any position now whether there should be a merger or not, and I probably won't have one. However, I have testified before the PSC as an individual citizen, which they allowed people to do. And I raised an issue of reliability, which is different from the ones that he and the questioning have raised. And I just would like to complicate life for you in anticipation of the work you're going to do at next month's meeting by explaining to you what I'm talking about. I am concerned about something that involves the electric utility industry generally, and not just the electric utility industry, the communications industry and others, where we're interconnected and dependent, and we've achieved enormous efficiencies and cost savings over the last 50 or 100 years by tying ourselves together. But in the process, we've also made our infrastructure vulnerable to various things. The thing which is clearest to most people are cyber attacks that the president's going to mention tonight, and like it could be probably North Korea. I assume North Korea attacking Sony, but it could be somebody attacking Washington, D.C. or the United States. But aside from malevolent actions by people who want to hurt us, it can be natural things, like the sun, from which we're dependent, not only for solar energy, which I'm also for, but all of our food supply and our warmth and the rest. Every once in a while, there are these huge flares come out of there, and they cause disruption way up in the magnetosphere, and it can create currents down below, and something could shoot into our grid and knock things out. So I'm interested in what you call high impact, low probability events. I'm interested in seeing utilities and governments and others spend the brains and the thinking through, objective analysis to the extent we can do it, and the money if we can, to protect ourselves from something going wrong or making ourselves resilient so we can recover fairly soon. Mr. Robinson mentioned the 8 days lost from the derecho. Okay? Think some of these things could have 30 days lost. I participated in an exercise in December by InfraGard, which is a national 501c3 sponsored by the FBI to try to get people thinking about long-term things, where they asked us to think of 60-day interruptions. Now that would be disastrous to our kind of culture and civilization. So I want to see the PSC pressing these two utilities and everybody else to work together. And it's not something that we're working in isolation. We have a national organization, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which has a complicated and strange process for setting national reliability standards. They've initiated a proceeding on this very issue, the solar part, called GMD, geomagnetic disturbances. They're going to have a petition filed by an industry, a largely industry organization this week, and then they'll have a process for going over it, and we'll be talking about it. I have personally asked these two utilities, who are going to be here one way or the other, their facilities are here, their infrastructure, whether there's a merger or not, whether this merger takes place or maybe PEPCO sells itself to somebody else rather than Exelon. The facilities are there. I've asked them to look at what can be done in terms of monitoring, sharing information, making it transparent, objective analysis. And I want to tell you, I don't think any of this stuff is free. Sunshine is free, but solar energy isn't free. The $3 per installed watt isn't free. And the storage, if we have a battery, isn't free. And the backup power for when the sun isn't shining isn't free. So I'm not looking for something free. I think that we should not kid ourselves, that we can both have free lunch, right, and have no interruptions. We need a reasonable balance here. And I hope you will work with the utilities and Mr. Robinson and his group and the PSC and others to try to come up with as good answers as we reasonably can in dealing with these issues. And I've shared with you what I filed with the PSC. I have to modify that a little because I've learned things already from PEPCO as I didn't realize they were doing. I'm asking them to do more things. I'm asking Exelon to do more things. And I do want to emphasize to you one thing about electricity. It's very important that we have more solar. But solar is a drop in the bucket of our total electricity supply. And everything we can do to double it and quadruple it and whatnot, it'd still be a drop. One of the beauties of it is if it's done right, if there's a terrible power failure, and the people who have solar on their roofs or wherever can disconnect from the grid, then we can keep that, at least that bit of our power supply going. But we got to make sure that the laws that our DC Council passes and the policies that the PSC sets and the practices that the 30 or so suppliers, all do really allow disconnection, because you got to think of that ahead. All of these things are important. All of these things are useful. But keep in mind, almost all of our electricity comes from outside of DC. And I believe, I may have the wrong number, but I believe 20% of it, roughly, comes from one of those nuclear power plants that Exelon co-owns with its partner in France, Électricité de France, at Calvert Cliffs. So we have a huge interest in that plant working. And when I think of my kind of reliability, there's something called black start. If you have a real power failure, you have to have enough power to restart the power plant. And I want to make sure that people have thought it through, that there has been discussion, there has been policy. We've heard it mentioned of the PJM interconnection, which I think is probably the most progressive and best managed in the country. Certainly was when I was younger and more active in this field. But they've been thinking about black start in terms of little power failures and how you sign a contract with somebody who will sell you power to do that. If you have a huge power failure, which involves a region of the country, many states, and lasts, it takes a huge amount of power to restart a nuclear power plant. So one of the things I'm going to want to find out over the next few months is, what are the best practices around the world? What are they doing in China? What are they doing in France? What can we learn? What can we ask? What can we demand? And I hope you broaden the scope of your inquiry, because you're only in a group of advisors. The Public Service Commission is these 3 people appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council. They're going to make the decision for us, and I don't know what happens if they make one decision and Delaware makes another, but we won't worry about that tonight. But the longer range is going to have to involve an awful lot of cooperation by a lot of people, and an industry which, like most human beings, is very conservative. People don't dash to jump to change everything, and they probably shouldn't. They should be careful and objective, but we need to make a lot of progress. So that's something I want to keep talking with you about, not just tonight and in next month, but as this progresses along and other things go on. Thank you very much for the chance to talk with you.
Watch your step. Does anyone else in the audience wish to talk about this? Yep.
I just wanted to let everyone here know I'm from Councilmember Mary Che's office, and she's having a roundtable on this very topic on Friday. this Friday, January 23rd at 11 in room 500 of the Wilson Building. Feel free to give our office a call if you want to sign up to testify or just to attend. You don't have to sign up to attend, but anyway, just wanted to let everyone know.
Will they have minutes of the meeting? Do you know?
Sorry?
Will they have minutes of that meeting?
Of the round table?
Mm-hmm.
The roundtables, we videotape, but they don't type up any sort of transcript or anything.
Okay.
But the videos are usually available on the council website, a few days after we have the roundtables.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Andrea, have we made an effort to have Mark Battle from PEPCO as our regional representative come and discuss PEPCO's position on this?
I have not made that effort, but I can reach out to him.
Didn't he
He
come
came
to
here.
a meeting that
Yeah.
I wasn't at?
Oh, I have that.
Yeah.
I was just looking at my notes for
That's what he was
that.
talking about, right?
Mark Battle
Yes,
was here on June 17th, 2014.
right.
Yeah, but he talked about the merger.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. So he was here.
He was here, but should we have him back at this point?
That's your call. Sounds like you've heard both
Okay.
sides. I don't know. I'm sure if you invite him, he'd be happy to come. I don't know. Cool. All right. So that does that. So I guess we'll circulate to our listserv the resolution so the public can digest it, and we'll vote on that next meeting, assuming it's voted on. We'll put it on the agenda. So next, we just have some miscellaneous items. First, Malachi circulated the minutes from December 2014. So I'll make a motion to approve those minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion of the minutes?
Let me just say that I neglected to put these out front, so if anybody wants a copy, they're here.
Given no discussion, let's vote on it. All in favor of the minutes, and I'll note that new commissioners can still vote on the minutes even though they weren't there. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All, okay. 6-0-0. Next up, so we received an email from Forest Hills Connection. We run an advertisement on that, and our advertisement is expires, I think, the end of the month. So they told us that if we wish to continue our advertisement in 2015, the header ad, which is I think the ad that we have right now, is $960 for 2015. And they asked if we would like to renew it. So, yes.
Excuse me, there was something in that email about whether we want to renew it or whether we want to increase it to
The
Yeah,
12.
so
a
there's-
side.
so we
There's
could
another issue.
Yeah, so we could switch it to. So right now we have the top, a
We
like
have a
horizontal
banner.
banner. We can change it so we have the right side of the screen for $1,200, and that ad is wider but taller, or narrower width-wise but taller. So those are the two options, I guess. Does anyone have a preference? Well, I guess a couple issues. Do we want to renew this? Well, I guess let's chat about that. And then if so, which ad style do we want? So I guess, generally speaking, do we want to renew it? Does anyone have thoughts on that?
I support it. I was wondering, are we paying for the placement, or are we paying for the current ad we have up there? Do we have the ability to change the design, or?
Yeah, so a graphic designer that I know made the
Okay.
current ad. We can certainly use a different graphic designer or redo it. Or if you
I'm just
want to
making
do
sure
it.
we have the option.
Yeah, we can do whatever we want.
you want to say
Well, I'm
anything?
supportive of advertising. I don't have a preference, one or the other than just the larger ad is more support for Forest Hills Connection.
I think the Forest Hills Connection is the best thing going in Forest Hills. I think it's a fabulous way for people to connect with their community, and I really applaud Marlene for having the idea and implementing it and keeping it going, because it's a lot of work. And I would just say, I think it would be awesome if we switched from the banner ad to the vertical, because I think after a while you don't see the banner anymore. You're so used to seeing it. And so I would just suggest that we try the vertical and have a new design. I don't know if Marlene has somebody who could help us design a vertical ad, if that could be incorporated in the higher cost, or if we would need to pay for that. But I would support a vertical ad at the $1,200, both because I think it would give us more visibility and it would make it look fresher, but also because I'm all in favor of supporting the Forest Hills Connection.
Okay. Does anyone else
I
have thoughts?
agree with Mary Beth. I think the Forest Hills Connection has been a very good thing for our community. I know other people have been using it also to find out what's going on in our particular neighborhood. So it's reaching further out, Marlene. Thank you.
Time to rename it Forest Hills and Wakefield.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Here we go. There's one in every crowd.
I will say that I think the banner is great, just because it pops up immediately. I understand what you're saying about it maybe being, we've had it for, 3 years, roughly? 2 years? I know 2 years. Is there a way in which if we wanted to just keep the header, I'm not saying we shouldn't do the other one, but we could increase the dollar value? I mean, to redo the ad itself, design-wise?
I mean, they gave us a dollar value.
Okay.
So
It's just
it's a little, I don't know that it's
Okay.
appropriate.
But we could redo the design.
Yeah, we can,
Right.
we can
Make it
redesign it
fresher.
to make it
Right.
a different color or whatever we want.
So personally, I think we should do the ad where it is. It's fine, either place.
All right, so does someone wish to introduce a motion on renewing in whatever size they feel like?
Well, I would just say, as the new treasurer, not having any of the treasurer's data in front of him, not knowing, our budget by heart, I would say maybe we should stick with what we have paid for in the past, what was budgeted in the past, unless we know that Bob incorporated the extra money in the budget for advertising.
Okay,
So I'm proposing the 900.
okay, so you're
960.
making a motion to
960.
continue the header for 960. Okay, is there a second? I'll second it. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor of renewing the header for 960, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, passes 600. Next up, Mary Beth, you want to talk about the Van Ness Vision Committee?
Yes, the Van Ness Vision Committee was created 2 years ago, and it's an ad hoc committee, which means it only survives for a 2-year term of the ANC. I won't go into everything that the committee has done, but we've been extremely active, and several commissioners serve on the committee, and we intend to be even more active going forward. So I would just propose that we re-up the Van Ness Vision Committee as an ad hoc committee of ANC 3F for another 2 years.
Okay, I'll second that. Is there any discussion?
Does it have to stay an ad hoc? Can it be a standing committee?
Let's keep it ad hoc for now in case we switch over to Main Street. I think it's cleaner.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of renewing the ad hoc committee? Raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
6-0, passes. Lastly, Maliki, you want to talk about a tech committee?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we create another ad hoc committee, a technology committee, that will be charged with designing and launching a new ANC 3F website. And the purpose of this committee, or the task before this committee, would be to assess what our needs are as a commission, what the public needs are, what their expectations are from our website, and then to explore the various design and hosting options involved with that. So I would propose to do just a one-year committee, though I would aim to have the website launched in 6 months, and then the committee would continue to watch it over the subsequent 6 months to make, do revisions. And
I think you should make it 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, just because the definition in the bylaws of an ad hoc committee is 2 years.
Okay.
So I just keep it clean.
Okay. So once we get a great website up and running, then we'll figure something else.
Maintain it.
Maintenance.
Yes.
Manager committee, I don't know.
Okay.
Second.
Second, okay. Any discussion?
Who's going to chair it?
I'm willing to chair it.
Okay. And Pat said that he would help
I will
with
help
the
out.
website.
I'd like to have you on it as well.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Good.
All right, all in favor of the tech committee resolution? Raise your hand, say aye. Passes 6-0. I'll make a motion, that's it, that's all on our agenda, so I'll make a motion to.
Sorry, I'm sorry, can I just ask a question?
Yes.
About budget for that? I mean, do you need budget money?
Probably.
I don't expect now any budget money. I don't need budget money right now. If we do need money, we'll come back to the commission.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So given that's the end of our agenda, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Passes. Andrea, you in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Sweet. Thank you, everyone. Great first meeting.
Run home to see the State of the Union. It's in 2 minutes.
Have you met Rachel yet?
I'm at the
Oh, you did? Okay. Yes.